That missile is targeted to the giant's current position. Where's the giant, Mansley? Welcome to the Hey You Guys podcast. I'm Rob, this is Liam, and this week we watched, on the request of our artist Dari, 1999's The Iron Giant, directed by Brad Bird and starring Vin Diesel in his best film to date, Jennifer Aniston and Harry Connick Jr. Only in an animation would those three seem right starring in a film together. But did you know The Iron Giant himself was partly designed by Joe Johnston, director of Captain America and The Rocketeer? And the film was originally intended as a musical with songs created by Pete Townsend of The Who. This film is based on a novel from 1968 called The Iron Man. And if we stuck to the original source material, our titular hero would be having a Who Burns Best contest in Australia against a giant space dragon. I mean, spoiler alert already, what we have on screen is amazing. Liam, I love this film.
Oh, yeah. The thing is, it's a bit of a weird one. And I think for many people, it flew under the radar because released in 1999, like you said, this was a time when everyone was pushing for 3D. That was the thing. This very much is the Castlevania Symphony of the Night of the animated movie world. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to you, but stick with me on this one. Yeah. No, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, make no mistake, is one of the greatest video games of all time. But the problem with it was released in 1997 on the PlayStation. And it's a 2D Metroidvania game. Jesus Christ, early morning on a Sunday. And at that time, all anyone was interested in was 3D games. And of course, you go back now, those early PlayStation 1 3D games have aged horrendously, whereas Symphony of the Night has aged like a fine wine. And I feel like this fell into that same kind of category. There is CG in this. The titular Iron Giant himself is, I think, entirely CG for the entire film.
It's like cell animation and stuff.
Yeah, but this film goes to great lengths to hide that in many respects. This really is a traditional animated film, and it came out in 1999 at a time when Pixar were really pushing forward with the 3D. Everybody wanted to do 3D. Like the Disney films at the time, the 2D animated films, those were all really struggling. It wasn't until they went to 3D with Tangled and stuff that they really started picking up again. So, yeah, I think it was a victim of timing more than anything else. Of course, I think Warner Brothers failed to advertise it in the correct way, but it has turned into an absolute cult classic because at the end of the day, for all of those faults, because of its timing issues, etc., quality shines through. And make no mistake, this is one of the greatest animated movies of all time. I don't think that's a stretch to say this. Yeah. It's a perfect little 87-minute movie. There's not an ounce of fat on it. It's so sweet, but it's propellant. There's not a huge amount of action, but you're never bored. It's a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I stand by it. It's Vin Diesel's best film. The film,
and that's not a dig at Vin Diesel either. He's been in some great films, but this could really be his greatest role.
Okay, no, it was a dig at Vin Diesel.
I mean, you're saying Boiler Room, Fast Five, Guardians of the Galaxy. Those are legitimately fantastic movies, but I think this might be better than all of them.
Yeah, but that's because Vin Diesel is he's not starring in any of those films. He's being supported. Anyway, we're not going
this is all coming from a guy whose wife is obsessed with Vin Diesel. I don't fucking get it. I don't, and as a heterosexual male,
she has made me watch in the cinema every fucking Fast film.
Which isn't a problem. I've seen all the Fast films in the cinema, but not because Vin Diesel's in it, not because oh God, he's such a dream. I just don't get the Vin Diesel thing. Usually when you kind of look at the screen, it's I don't want to fuck the guy, but you can see it's oh dude, that guy's super handsome. I totally get it. It's if Bethan's I really say Henry Cavill. I'm yeah, dude, I totally get it. If someone's oh God, Vin Diesel's such a dream. I'm the guy who looks like a bit of a potato, really? But yeah, supposedly very popular with the women.
My wife says things like, I climb him like a tree. All right, calm down.
Well, he's obviously well-liked. I don't understand it, but he's got an animal magnetism, apparently.
Yeah, the 50s, 60s aesthetic, it looks like a film from back then. Do you know what I mean? The Lord of the Rings style, the old original Lord of the Rings animation that they had. It looks, but it's so good. It's quietly funny. What made me laugh out loud, I couldn't believe it, was when the Iron Giant jumps into the lake and Harry Connick Jr. floats along. Mm-hmm. And then he's in the middle of the road and the guy goes, "You're in the middle of the road." And he's like, "I know."
See, I really enjoyed that scene. It's one of my favorite scenes of the film. I think you've got it completely right there. And one of the things about this film, it's the action isn't massive. Even the final scene, it's more emotional than anything else. The comedy is there, but it's not kind of forcing the issue. Like, make no mistake, this isn't one of those kind of like, even Pixar like you have nowadays, where it's like one for us, one for them. You know, like usually it's like, oh, well, this is for the kids, but this is the joke you'll get. There's actually none of this. This is Spielbergian levels of direction and writing here. That you know, and we'll get to the ET comparisons in a bit.
But it's the Cold War and stuff as well, isn't it? So it's all adult themed. It's
there's a lot of adult themes, but to take it, but like the problem is with that scene with the lake where the Iron Giant kind of bombs into the lake and all the water goes there. It just gives me flashbacks to Brazil. I'm not sure if I've ever told this story before, but I went to Rio de Janeiro for the World Cup in 2014, and I just went into the sea. Like, anyway, I was wearing my new Ray-Bans. They're prescription as well, so you know I can't see without them. I'm reliant upon these sunglasses, and they, you know, with prescriptions, they cost like £180 or whatever it was. And I've just got there first day, and I am standing in what I can only describe as, say, 2 foot of water, and I'm talking to my friends who are on the beach, blah, blah, blah. I turn around and there is a wave like a foot from my face. And I'm like 6'7". I'm like, well, what am I? I'm 7'2".
You're 13'12".
I'm 13'7". And the wave, I just didn't understand it. I didn't know it was possible. Obviously, I've done my research, but the wave was just there. I turned around, it smashed me in the face. And honestly, it was like that scene, like where he's in the chair, just spinning around. It was the only time I've ever been in that position where I was underwater. Again, 2 foot of water. All of a sudden, I'm just underwater spinning around and just no control. And I remember it was slow motion. My sunglasses slipped off my face. And it was, I remember reaching for them and just getting a finger on them as they just disappeared. I've kind of been swept up onto the beach. Sunglasses gone. Great start to the fucking holiday. So yeah, I completely understood his pain. I enjoyed the scene, but yeah, flashback to tough times.
And that was Travels with Liam section of this podcast. We get one at least once a week. So
yeah, that, my wife, my height, these are the things that always come up. But to bring it back to your original point, like the aesthetic in this, as you say, it's pure 50s. It's pure Cold War era. I mean, you know, the town is called Rockwell for a reason. There's so many nods to the American art that's inspired by Norman Rockwell, a famous, you should check out his stuff. It's absolutely fantastic. But this is, you know, Brad Bird directed this film, and he clearly has an obsession with 50s Americana, B-movie, sci-fi from the era. Yeah. You know, you see it in his other films. The Incredibles is nothing if not, you know, a 50s B-movie. It very much harks back to the kind of the glory, the golden era, I suppose you'd call it, of superhero movies. Tomorrowland is just basically this movie writ large. You know, the kind of 50s.
Was that the one with George Clooney?
Yeah. It's a massively underrated movie. Like, it's totally another one of that.
Really good film, but it had such a bad rap, yeah.
Well, it's like this. They didn't know how to advertise it. I actually remember when that film came out, I loved the mystery of it. Like, they really went for the whole. I don't think it was a matter of they didn't advertise it. I just don't think it kind of connected. I remember seeing these kind of trailers which really didn't give away much, and you had this kind of 50s futuristic kind of sci-fi style, which obviously you have in this film. And I was like, this is right up my alley, and I couldn't wait to see it. And I went to see it, and the problem is it's a tough sell. Not much really happens. And I think that was the same issue with this film. You know, there's clearly a love of 50s sci-fi, 50s superhero films. A lot of it is kind of inspired by Toho animation from Japan in the 50s, that kind of aesthetic as well. But it's aged so beautifully. Like, I don't think that style of animation is ever going to age out, basically. And the same is true of that hand-drawn animation. Yes, again, there is CG, but it's used so sparingly that you hardly even notice it's CG. Yeah. Like, for the most part, you look at this and go, oh, this is a cel-animated movie. And that's why 50 years from now, Toy Story might look a little bit ropey, but this is still going to look glorious.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
You said as well, Brad Bird directed this film. The darkness behind the reason why this film was made, and actually the source material of the book.
Yeah.
Brad Bird was in part inspired to do this film because his sister was murdered by her husband. His pitch was, what if a gun had a soul and didn't want to be a gun? But the book as well, called The Iron Man, or I think it was called The Iron Giant in America, the book, because they didn't want to confuse it with the Marvel hero.
Yeah.
Ted Hughes, who shares the same name as Hogarth and Annie from the film, wrote this book for his children to help them recover from the suicide of their mother, Sylvia Plath.
Yeah, some really dark stuff.
Oh, it just gets darker and darker as you go on with this.
But it's weird because, like you say, like the story around it is obviously very dark, both for the director and the original writer. Yeah. But what it represents in the movie is such a beautiful and nuanced dealing of the themes of death. I mean, some of the, this was written by a poet laureate, so it's no surprise that some of the dialogue is borderline poetic. Like, there's not many animated films where you get stuff like souls don't die or killing is bad but dying isn't. Like, it doesn't nothing in this film is heavy-handed. It's dealt with in a very subtle way. And as you say, the stuff about the gun and the fact that the Iron Giant doesn't want to be a weapon, again, I feel like in a kind of less cultured hand, a less handed hand, it could all feel a little bit heavy-handed. But like it's the low-key scenes which are the really heartbreaking stuff. When the Iron Giant puts on the big S on his chest, and then suddenly he has that kind of
like Metallo Man or whatever, because he's playing a game with him. He says, "No, I don't want to be the bad guy. I want to be Superman."
Yeah, and you see the reaction when he suddenly realizes when he pulls the gun, how obviously it's how he's being programmed rather than what he is. The whole idea of free will, of choosing what you want to be and stuff, which runs all the way through this film. But like the Iron Giant's like reaction in that moment, where he's like so like scared and heartbroken, all with so little dialogue. And I know we make fun of Vin Diesel, like he doesn't have a huge amount to work with. And obviously, a big part of this is the animation by Warner.
I mean, he's got more to work with than I Am Groot mind in this.
Yeah, honestly, I even think roles like that, you've got to convey a lot of emotions with just I Am Groot. Like, it's a challenge in its own way. And whatever you might say about Vin Diesel, he does have the most distinctive voice.
Oh, yeah.
His voice is unbelievable.
I mean, it fit perfectly for this.
Yeah. It's like gravel run through an AK-47. It's absurd.
What I wanted to say as well, I love, this is one of the first films I've seen where the general of the army is the sympathetic one. Like, it was really good. It was done really well. The fact that he didn't want to destroy the Iron Giant or anything. If the Iron Giant is not against the country, it's not against them, why waste the time and the effort? It was done really well. Couldn't believe that everyone was just following Manly in this, to the point where they launched a nuclear rocket.
Well, that's the thing, though. But he kind of gets them into that position. Like, part of it is obviously the Kent Mansley performance, who's fantastic. What's his name? Christopher McDonald, who I always think of Shooter McGavin. Yeah, of course. But he is absolutely fantastic in this role. And obviously a big part of it is tied up into kind of 50s American, the obsessions with like reds around every corner. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I had the same issue yesterday where you're like, not obsessive, Jesus Christ. Oh, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it kind of plays into the themes of the era, but it's all kind of tied into this character who's so obsessed and so kind of, part of it is political, but part of it is his own insecurities. Like, that's the big issue with this film. And it kind of ties into American insecurities at the time and the fear of communism and all these other things.
He's afraid of the Iron Giant, so everyone else has to be afraid of it too.
Well, yeah, he's afraid of what it represents. I think he even says at one point in the film, this could destroy us, so we have to strike first. I mean, it's very much the Batman versus Superman kind of dynamic, I guess. If there's 1% chance that he turns against us, we have to attack first, or we have to be ready for it. But he's such an amazingly written character again, because in it, like, you think at the start, he's basically just a bit of a buffoon. And he's played very much for laughs, all that sports slugger, cowboy, buckaroo.
I love that. Oh my God, that was fantastic. How many names could you come up with?
It was like, again, it's almost charming. Although the bit when he's kind of sitting across from Hogarth's bedroom and just staring at him while he sleeps is pretty goddamn creepy, but we'll let that one slide. And the fact that he's pretty leery about his mum as well, but whatever. But yeah, like that whole like concept, paranoia, that was the word I was looking for earlier. I do apologize. That concept of American paranoia in the 50s, the fact that he could get the army involved because they were always on edge, but he's just taken it to that extreme. But like I said, for most of this part, he's played for laughs. But towards the end, it gets really dark really quick. The way he threatens Hogarth, and obviously the way he's just willing to kill everyone because, like, he's the one who's scared. He's just like, he's so scared that he's just reacting. He's the one who, like, he's not even thinking. Like, in that moment, he's just bombed the Iron Giant. And then, like you said, it's the head of the military, the dad from Seinfeld, isn't it? Not Seinfeld.
Frasier,
thank you very much. Yes, thank you. He's the one who suddenly points out, it's like, you look where the Iron Giant is. And then all of a sudden, all those people like we're willing to die for your country. But then this cowardly, Mansley, he's the first one like, I don't want to die for my country. He just wants to get there because he's just constantly scared. The only thing I'll say about that scene, and sorry, I have to bring this up very quickly, is how fucking chilled is everyone in that town about their impending doom. They just find out the Rock is going to kill them all. They just kind of look up and go, "Oh, this is a bit of a bummer. A bit of a bummer. You're all about to get wiped off the map."
When they say about, "Oh, should we hide?" Well, it's not going to help, is it? Come on. Like,
well, they even say, they're like, "Oh, it's too late for that now." But it's all like really monotone. Like there's no sense of panic. No one's kicking and screaming. They're just like, "Well, we're pretty fucked here." But you know, it does lead to that beautiful final shot with the Iron Giant, which I
wanted to say as well, going on about Kent Mansley, the darkest part of him. And yeah, okay, launching a rocket is quite dark. But when Dean, played by Harry Connick Jr., says Hogarth's with him, he goes, right. So, and he turns around, and that split second that he turns around to the general, he goes, "They just told me he killed a kid."
Oh, yeah. Like, it's dark stuff.
He is willing for Hogarth to die, so his fear isn't realised.
Yeah.
It is dark.
And it's like you said, it's an interesting approach, because I think most movies would go, "Oh, well, we'll just make the military the bad guy." But in this, they really don't. And for the most part, you can see on the look of on most of the soldiers' faces, they're not these kind of hardened military types. A lot of them are kind of clearly reserves, weekend soldiers.
National Guard at this point.
National Guard, like what it made me think of, and this is going to be an important point later on, is it made me think of Rambo First Blood. Like one of the great things about Rambo First Blood when you go and watch it, because I think, we have this picture of what Rambo is, him killing a whole army, but the first film is actually really kind of nuanced and grounded in many respects. And a big part of that is they go to great lengths to explain that Rambo's not fighting an army. He's fighting a bunch of weekend warriors who are in no way equipped to deal with a guy as desperate and as well-trained as Rambo. So they really do kind of go, yeah, he's fighting loads of people, but these guys aren't prepared for him. Whereas usually, nowadays we think of Rambo, he's just fighting a legitimate army. Whereas, when I saw these soldiers, they really made me think of the soldiers in Rambo First Blood Part 1, where it's just like, yeah, they're kind of showing up like, Jesus Christ, what the hell have we gotten ourselves into? Is there really a robot? Jesus, there's going to be a bomb. This guy's a fucking psycho. So it's like, the bad guy isn't the American military. It's paranoia, it's fear, and it's all kind of summed up in this one character, who I don't think is evil. I just think he's scared.
In First Blood, even to the point where they accidentally let a rocket off. And we'll get to that whenever we do First Blood.
But yeah. Spoiler alert. We're going to be doing First Blood next week. We'll get to that eventually. What's the point in tiptoeing around?
Am I going to have to act surprised when I go, what are we doing next week, Lee?
Next week? Oh, First Blood. God, I can't wait to do First Blood.
Do you know what you said about Vin Diesel's voice? There is another voice in this that might have worked as well.
Yeah.
The foreman, Marv.
Yeah.
Oh, played by James Gammon, who, if you're a sports movie enthusiast, you would have seen him as the coach in Major League. His voice, like when he's talking to, what was his name again? Kent Mansley. When he's talking to him about things just disappearing, and he goes, "Where's your car?" and things like his voice is fun. It's so soothing.
It's a great voice, isn't it? And that is the thing with this film. Despite it being an Iron Giant, in many respects, it is quite a small film, and you can see that in the relatively small voice cast. There's not some big booming voice cast. And, the kid who plays Hogarth, it's strange because I'd never heard of Eli.
I was going to ask you, do you know who he was? Eli Marenthal.
Yeah. He's been in like a bunch of like kids movies and stuff like this, but I'm just like surprised he hasn't gone on to big, because he's fantastic in this.
So he's Stifler's brother from the original.
Is he really?
Yeah.
I didn't get that far down the list. I just saw that kind of like what he's famous for, and there's a bunch of like animated films and kid shows. I was like, oh, maybe he's just not gone on to do anything big, but I had no idea.
Original American Pie 1 and 2. He's Stifler's brother.
Oh, very well. He's quite good in that, but he's fantastic.
He chose to go off and do university, and I think, because I was reading up about him, he's now a doctoral candidate. Like he's doing his doctorate or something. So
he's obviously doing very well for himself.
This dude, yeah.
Well, he's got this this absolutely beloved movie, like a truly, like, I'm not sure if it's a beloved performance because I'm not sure how people feel about it, but he's fantastic as Hogarth Hughes. Jennifer Aniston, who people forget, took a couple of interesting roles back in the late 90s. She was in Office Space.
Yeah.
She was in this. She was in, what was the other one I really liked? Along Came Polly. Oh, Leprechaun. No, I've got a real soft spot for Along Came Polly, but I think a big part of that is with the basketball sequence. Ben Stiller and Philip Seymour Hoffman.
When all the sweat is just rubbing it into his face.
It's just the stuff when Philip Seymour Hoffman is just so confidently shit at basketball. Yeah. Rain Man, white chocolate. Maybe I'm just remembering those scenes. But Jennifer Aniston obviously ended up doing a lot of romantic comedies, but she is such a likable screen presence. Like even today, I forget the name. Is it called Murder Mystery? The film she did with it's a Netflix film she did with Adam Sandler.
Never seen it, but yeah, I think there's a sequel to that coming out as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think it did really well. That's a perfect example of both her and Adam Sandler. Whatever you might think of their movies, and obviously both of them have had their hits and misses, they're both incredibly likable screen presence, and it makes it's a 3-star movie. But it's made so much more watchable because of both of them. And I think she's just got that it thing. I think it's a bit of a shame that outside of Friends being the biggest show possibly of all time, on the big screen, she maybe never had that breakout role. But no matter what she's in, I always like her. And even like in this, it's a relatively limited voice acting role, but you can really feel that warmness coming through. And I think she's great. And she's got that.
She has those motherly instincts. It's really, really good.
And it is low-key in this, like many aspects of this film, but even a comic timing comes through. Like, I just really like Jennifer Aniston in movies. I think she's fantastic. Maybe I just want to talk about Adam Sandler because I just watched Hustle, and he's fucking fantastic. It's a by-the-numbers sports film, but if you haven't watched it, get on Netflix and give it a go, because he is absolutely brilliant, and it'll really remind you how great a dramatic... How am I talking about Adam Sandler's dramatic actor in this? It's absolutely insane.
Because his dramatic films, but it's the same with Will Ferrell. His dramatic films are great. His other films are dog shit. Even Elf. I don't care what anyone says, Elf is shit. Right, moving on.
I'm not going to defend you. I like Elf, but I like Will Ferrell. I think it's overrated. I don't think it's great. But yeah, we'll end up going down a rabbit hole. One of the most interesting
I did want to say about one of the other voices we haven't mentioned. Emmett Walsh.
Yes, yeah.
He was the fisherman at the beginning.
Yeah, he's that guy for sure. He's just got such a distinctive face.
Blade Runner. What else was he in? Critter.
He's been in tons. He's been in a bunch of Coen Brothers movies.
Yeah, he was in Red Scorpion, which we will never watch on this podcast.
Was he in oh my god, what was the one with Nick Cage? Raising Arizona.
Yes, yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was the one talking about the baby with his heart on the outside. And he just shows up in films. He's got a great face. He's got a great voice. He kills it for a scene and then just disappears again. That's his shtick. Yeah. But it does bring up a good point, because he's the fisherman at the start, and if ever there is a trope in this movie, it is the arrival or the appearance of the monster, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's always a fucking fisherman. It's always some crusty old boat in the middle of the sea, and they're always the first to see the monster. Happened in Roland Emmerich's Godzilla. Happens in, I know it's not their first appearance, but it happens in Pacific Rim. The fisherman needs to be saved. I think it happens in 2014's Godzilla as well. Monsters versus Aliens. A whole host of movies. If there is a monster and you want to do a reveal, they come out of the water and they either destroy or save a crusty old fisherman.
I'm surprised he was able to be saved, because that dude should have been bleeding to death after going through that plate glass window of his windscreen of the boat. He hit something. He hit something so hard, he's able to... And look, I don't know what the windscreens are like on a boat, but I would assume that they're pretty tough because they have to deal with a lot.
They're going to do a bit of damage. They're going to give you a nick at the very least.
And he went through that like it was nothing. But what I wanted to say about that scene, the introduction of the Iron Giant in that was so good. He's like, I can see the lighthouse. And then you just see those two glowing eyes as the head turns. The animation in that is great. It's
great animation. It's great character design, because the outline is one of those, and we've talked about before with stuff like Batman and stuff. I think we used it as the teaser for this, where it's just like, it's all blacked out and all you can see is the outline and the eyes. And it's basically what it has is a great silhouette. Like straight away, you only need to see it at a glance. You're like, I know that's the Iron Giant. And the other thing is, like, from a kind of animation perspective, or the way it's drawn, or, animated, whatever you want to call it, it's actually relatively simplistic. It's a very simple, clean 50s design. And yet somehow the character appears to be remains incredibly expressive. Yeah. Like it's got almost like that kind of like, I don't want to call it like a teapot, it's kind of, its mouth is just hinged on, like it's just hinged. It's just a jaw. It just opens and closes.
His head is like light bulb shaped.
Yeah. It should be really hard to get expressions out of that design, but they never fail to in this film. It's unbelievable. But
do you like the fact that there's no explanation about the Iron Giant?
I never noticed that before until rewatching it this time.
He arrives. There's no reason why. There's no reason of what created him. And I love the fact that they turned around and gone, "You've got no memory. It might be that little dink on your head." Like this, this thing can repair itself from a nuclear explosion, right? He can make every little part of him can come back and repair itself. But he can get amnesia.
But you could say the same thing of a human body. Like, the human body is capable of so many things. You lose my leg, they only take a little bang on the head, and it can do amazingly messed up things.
But if I lose my leg is not hopping across the sun to come back to me.
I will give you that. But I agree with you. What I love about it is the mystery and the fact that this film's 87 minutes. They could have made it 2 hours and done a backstory and said, "Oh, well, he's from this alien planet," or have a kind of a cutaway scene when you see him destroying an alien planet at the behest of his alien overlord, something like that. But they never do it. They actually imply at one point that he's a kid almost, kind of thing. And I'm not sure if that's because he's taking a bang on the head or whatever, but the film isn't about that. It doesn't matter where he's from. This really is about a kid and his giant robot friend, and that father he doesn't have. And I find it so interesting that you've been so against doing an ET podcast, and yet you pick this, which is basically just ET. It's unfucking, I didn't know, because I was watching it, I was like, dude, this is, I looked over to my wife, I was like, this is basically E.T. Why did Rob pick this when he's so against it? And she was looking at the facts, and supposedly Brad Bird has taken offense to the fact that everyone keeps bringing up the fact that this is E.T. It's like, well, E.T. never kicked ass and all this stuff. And it's true, and I'm not going to lie, I would take the Iron Giants over E.T. And I don't mean that the movie, I mean legitimately. The design of the Iron Giant is so likable compared to that horrendous little wrinkly turd that is E.T., which has always been the wall that hasn't allowed me to love that film,
I'm not taking full on credit for this, right? We've done this on the request of Darry, who does our art.
Credit. I think you can replace credit with blame in that sentence quite easily. I'm not sorry, Darry, but he is throwing you under the bus.
I'm not taking the blame for this as well, right? Darry has asked us to do this, and yes, it was my choice. I chose on behalf of Darry, who actually has turned around as well and said, do not do an ET podcast. Darry has said, I do not want to do artwork for an ET podcast. But he chose the Iron Giant as well. So
it's interesting because, like you said, I don't think any of us have an issue with the narrative in ET. And as I said, one of the reasons I kind of want to go back and watch it is because I think there is going to be this kind of disconnect between how well the movie is invariably made. This is, early 80s Spielberg. There's no two ways it's going to be a really well-made film. But I think the one universal issue we all have with that movie is we don't like E.T., specifically the alien. We don't like the design. We don't like the character.
A walking ball sack, doesn't he?
He does look a bit like a walking ball sack. There's no two ways about it. Whereas you watch this film, and it's basically the same narrative. The kid, he's taken on this surrogate father/brother figure. It's just E.T. replaced with the Iron Giant. But the Iron Giant is so much cooler.
The whole thing
is so much more likable.
We might have to do E.T. now. The whole thing about the E.T. film is the fact he is just, from what I can gather, a paedophile that comes from another...
Oh, you really fucking hate E.T.
He's just grooming a kid, even to the point where they touch tips.
They actually do that in this film. Like if you don't want to be compared with E.T.
I mean, if anything, I'm not. Is a sex machine.
I'm not suggesting that there's anything sexual about the Iron Giant, but he even does this is going to sound so rude now. He even does the finger thing at the end. But he does do, he points his finger at his chest. And I was like, this is so fucking E.T. It's unbelievable.
But they don't touch tips, dude.
They don't touch. There's no docking. That's the issue, isn't it? Jesus Christ. Are we going to be able to E.T.? I'm not sure if I want to tarnish the memory of E.T. with such sexual... Well, I would say, is it sexual innuendo? I'm not sure at this point. It's just filth.
I'm going to give you, right? Because you're going to either make me in the future do E.T. or the Clone Wars. You get one.
Yes.
You get one.
Oh, God. See, the Clone Wars, all that is the completionist in me, although the whole Obi-Wan thing has got me kind of reappraising the original trilogy. So there is an argument there. But the other side, I do want to go back and watch E.T., and I do very much want to get your reaction, because as I said, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation where we kind of like, we're half talking about how brilliantly it's directed, how fantastic it's acted, but we're just going to be unable to get over the fact that E.T. looks like a walking ball sack. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. We'll get there eventually for sure. But one of the other movies this film really reminded me of, and it's a little bit more action-packed than that, is My Neighbor Totoro. It's kind of, obviously it's a small town in Japan rather than a small town in Maine. And there's no, Totoro pays
only
it all right back.
This film has only reminded you of this film. All our listeners are going, what the fuck is that?
Oh, everyone knows My Neighbor Totoro nowadays. Come on, man. But My Neighbor Totoro, I mean, that film is unique in so much that it pays back the threat to an almost existential level. You're like, am I even watching a movie? Because in that, the only thing that happens is his little sister kind of gets slightly lost. But it's that same thing of a misunderstood monster, something that looks scary, but is actually quite sweet. So it's like in my head, I'm like, this movie is like the almost perfect combination of E.T. and My Neighbor Totoro, but all wrapped in this kind of 50s Americana aesthetic. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like my kind of film. And if anything, the only thing that disappoints me is that I didn't watch this when I was younger, because I think the first time and the only time I watched it was maybe 10 years ago. And I watched it, I was like, Jesus Christ, why did I wait so long to watch this movie?
I watched this probably about 10, 15 years ago as well. Like the only time I've watched it. I've only ever seen it once before. And
I think I liked it even more this time.
Yeah, too right. Like the second watching was better. You're seeing a lot more stuff. And I guess as I'm getting older as well, and now I have a child, I'm seeing different things in it. Like the whole the boy is just looking for a father figure. Yeah. The giant is just a child. He's looking for something to lead him to teach him what's right from wrong. You don't have to be what you were designed to be, what you're bred to be. Do you know? And it's so well. The narrative in it is so well, and I like the path that they went compared to the original source material. Have you read the original book?
I haven't. No, and it is literally called the Iron Man, the original book.
Yeah, so it's the Iron Man, and what it is, it's kind of like in the style of when a monster calls. Where a monster, the tree tells a story over a couple of nights, and then the boy has to tell his story. So the Iron Giant arrives. He's, again, no explanation as to who he is. He's eating farm equipment. They set a trap. Hogarth is the boy used to lure him into the trap. The Iron Giant falls into that. They leave him for about a year. They go back and...
Jesus.
Yeah, they go back and see him, and then they become friends, and then the townspeople just treat the Iron Giant as another member of the community. All of a sudden, then, a space dragon appears from, space. He's the size of Australia. He lands in Australia. He demands everybody to feed him. The Iron Giant lets the army disassemble him, send him off to Australia, reassemble him, and he makes literally.
It sounds like a fever dream. Are you sure you didn't kind of smoke some peyote or something like that?
If that's a fever dream, wait until the end. Wait until the payoff. Then they make it. Then they make a deal. If the Iron Giant can survive in burning jet fuel or oil longer than the dragon can survive by the sun, I believe, if I remember rightly, then the dragon goes away. If not, the dragon gets to own the world. Turns out the dragon burns himself a lot. The Iron Giant only has a mangled ear. So they then talk about their lives, and it turns out that the dragon is some sort of celestial being that brings peace around with his song. So now he is sitting in the back. Yeah, so now the Iron Giant says, okay, I got a job for you. At sunset, you do your song. You sit behind sunset and you do your song, and you just give peace to the world. And that's how then they're trying to get through. Literally, this is the fucking book.
This is the only thing I will say is that it'll come to nobody's surprise that this book was written in the 60s. That sounds like a book written in the goddamn 60s.
That story of the book kind of fits if it was going to be a musical by Pete Townsend. Can you imagine the songs that they'd have about sitting and burning jet fuel or wherever it is?
It's bizarre, isn't it? Because you've got this obviously bizarre, like somewhat bizarre source material, and they've just taken the kind of essence of it, and it's been paid back so much for this film. And obviously the emphasis, rather than it being on a book, written in the 60s, which is going to be tied up with the kind of the themes and the politics of the time. And he's gone right back to 50s Americana. And a big part of that will be by Brad Bird. I mean, you have to give kind of credit to Warner Brothers Feature Animation, the studio who obviously worked on this film. Well, I don't think they're a studio
well, considering that the studio hobbled them a lot.
Yeah.
Literally cut their budget in half, cut their deadline. Just the studio just didn't want to go through it. After the Quest for Camelot, they were just like, we give up on animation.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when people think of Warner Brothers feature animation, like, what the hell do you think of? I don't think most people think, oh, the Iron Giant, that's a Warner Brothers movie. I just don't think they think that at all. They did a lot of DC stuff. They did Space Jam's probably the most famous output, but that's kind of only half animated. But yeah, Quest for Camelot absolutely sank. And, when I think of this film, what I really think of is, say, something like Titan AE, like in terms of the animation style. That's, I'm going to bring, I actually really like Titan AE.
I didn't mind, all I got in my head is that song from Lit.
From Lit, yeah, always. I mean, over my head by Lit, of course. But no, and as you say, it was at that point when they didn't know what they had, because all of a sudden, Quest for Camelot fails. It's suddenly, I guess they're working on this 97, 98, and all of a sudden the company's coming to the realization that 3D animation's where it's at, and supposedly this is the death knell of 2D animation. You could make that argument to be, outside of Studio Ghibli, still to be true, because Pixar, Disney, they're kind of going for a more kind of almost trying to trick you into the idea that it's been hand-drawn. But for the most part, it is a 3D world nowadays when it comes to animation. And they were obviously like, listen, we're behind the times. We've already committed to this. We're going to cut the budget. We're not really going to advertise it. We're just going to get it out the door. And obviously they didn't realize that they had absolute gold on their hands. And to be honest, even having such a great film, and even if they had advertised it properly, I still think the timing issue might have been a problem. But like I said, looking back, you have to give credit to them. And a big part of that, again, it comes from, so much of it comes from Brad Bird, clearly. I mean, obviously he started as a writer with The Simpsons, but you look at his directorial output, The Incredibles, again, 50s upset, the Ratatouille, like, this guy directed two of the best Pixar movies. And outside of Toy Story, probably the best sequel, like in The Incredibles 2. I would argue that's the best Pixar sequel, which isn't called Toy Story. It's not as good as the first one, but then I would argue that The Incredibles might be the best superhero movie of all time. Like, if you remove the whole animation part of the discussion.
The Incredibles is definitely the best Fantastic Four movie we're ever going to get.
100%. Well, I mean, that's what they should be looking at when they make a Fantastic. Of course they won't. They'll leave until the MCU thing. But like, the best Fantastic Four movie ever made is 100% Incredibles. And again, we've already mentioned Tomorrowland, the fact that it's obsessed with 50s sci-fi and stuff. But it's weird. I mean, he even kind of, he arguably made one of the best Mission Impossible films in Ghost Protocol. But it's bizarre, because I was convinced that he directed John Carter.
Mission Impossible.
Yeah. It was weird, because I actually thought he had done Mission Impossible 3, but that was J.J. Abrams.
Yeah.
He directed Ghost Protocol. And as I said, I don't know why I got it in my head that he had directed John Carter, but it was actually Andrew Stanton. Although that's another film I will actually go to bat for. It's not a great film, but it's not a bad film. I think I always have this soft spot.
That suffered from animation, like John Carter, when he's got, like, he finds the low center of gravity on Mars and he's able to jump. So it starts making the animation look terrible after that.
Well, the thing is, I think I always have a soft spot for these kind of films, these like ambitious failures. And don't get me wrong, John Carter doesn't quite nail the landing, no pun intended there. But I would say the same is true of The Lone Ranger. That's another really weird film, which takes a massive swing. If you go back and watch that film, it's weird as fuck, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, I like The Lone Ranger.
And I don't know, I just love a tryout. Like these films where somebody gives someone 300 million and it's just bizarre. Like John Carter, they didn't know how to advertise it, and it's not great, but it's one of those films like The Lone Ranger where everyone has already made their mind up. You can imagine the critics, they've got their pens ready, we are going to tear this film to pieces.
But that's the thing, isn't it? If you don't try, you're never going to get the next piece of gold. You're never going to get the next cult classic. If you just stick to the numbers, if you get the same thing over and over and over again, and things like this podcast are just going to be fucking boring.
Well, that's the thing.
You have to push the boat out.
Tomorrowland's another perfect example of that. It's another film which bombed. It didn't quite stick the landing, but there's so many great ideas, and I just love the fact that it's one of these big budget films which is trying to be different. But Brad Bird's a fantastically, talented, director, writer, the full works. And I still think even amongst all of those, I don't want to say it's his best film because I absolutely adore The Incredibles, but it's close. It's up there. Yeah. Like this really is one of the great animated movies. And I think especially the Iron Giant himself, I'm not sure if it's kind of like maybe more popular with people in the industry than it is with like the general public, because you can see it with other animators. Like this is held in such high regard. Like this will come up in Legacy, but it shows up in stuff like Ready Player One. You know, you get these references to the Iron Giant where you just know other animators look at a film like this and like, this is the film we should be making. You know, not even necessarily the same style or anything, but in terms of just the quality, how lean it is, how well written it is, and how, you know, in terms of like having a vision and delivering it to the screen, like it's almost pitch perfect in many respects.
And you mentioned Legacy briefly, right? And I know we'll get more into it, but I'm so glad this didn't get a sequel. It ended perfectly. The way it ended with, okay, the Iron Giant is going to rebuild himself, and now you decide, is he going to go back to Hogarth, or is he going to leave Earth, or is he just going to decide to help other people? You decide that. You know, so I like that. I mean, I was thinking that he's probably going to be sat there for years because his whatever he needs to survive, like a toe or something, is just.
Yeah. No, I'm glad there was no sequel. And again, you know, I think we've referenced in numerous points in this podcast about this film about how pitch perfect everything is, and I think that's true of the ending. Like you do have the big action set pieces, but it's so based in that emotional and characterization, you know, about the Iron Giant's journey, and to have such like an emotional ending, like, you know, when it comes as a surprise where you're like, I can't believe how much is this kind of, you know, like impacting me on an emotional level. Like the one that it made me think of, and it's not as well written as this, and it's a little bit more on the nose, but Wreck-It Ralph, when he's like sacrificed himself at the end, and I'm like, God, Jesus Christ, this is fucking emotional, isn't it? Wreck-It fucking Ralph.
I watched that with my 6-year-old nephew. We're watching it, he's loving it, and I got a tear in my eye. I'm good, but I'm bad, but that's good, and all that.
Oh, Jesus Christ, absolutely. It's always these animated movies where it comes out of nowhere, like Pixar. The classic with Pixar is getting you at the start of the film when you don't expect it. Like one of the most like beautiful but heartbreaking moments in cinema history. I'm not talking about animated films. I'm talking about cinema history. Is the opening section of Up? It's wordless. It is unbelievable. Like that 5 minutes of cinema is unfucking real. Where you're like, I don't even know these characters yet. No one said a word, and you're basically being shown like this kind of like collage of their lives, and by the end of it you're in absolute bits, and you look at the clock and you're like, this film's been on for 3.5 minutes. What the fuck is going on? And half the cinema is crying their goddamn eyes out. The same with like Inside. Is that the Pixar film?
Yeah, the emotions.
The emotions and stuff. The Fly Me to the Moon bit, or whatever it is, with like that stupid. It's like this stupid creature with like it was like her kind of imaginary character, and he like disappears. I'm like, oh my fucking Christ. And this is the same, but yeah, so incredibly well written. I mean, it would have been bold to have it where the Iron Giant is just dead.
Yeah.
But I did like the fact, I think I needed that, where you see that foot in the distance in the snow. I'm like, oh, thank God. Thank God he's okay.
You said for something that shouldn't show emotion, you see the smile on his face.
Oh, it's a beautiful final shot. Absolutely beautiful.
Right, we've talked about this for nearly an hour. We might have to move on.
One thing I have to say, right, just because we're talking about it at the moment, is you can imagine, I'm going on this journey because I've not seen this film for a long time, and I'm so invested. I'm like, the ending is so beautiful. I'm just like, this is just like the perfect way to end this film. And I was watching it on Netflix, and it comes up with "Surprise Me" at the bottom. And I never do the surprise me thing, but for some odd reason I was suddenly intrigued because I was on like such an emotional high in many regards kind of thing. I was like, God, that was such a beautiful movie. It's like, what would Netflix suggest that I watch after the Iron Giant? So I press surprise me, and the first thing that comes up is child abuse and sexual themes. I'm like, what the fuck? And it suggested that I watch Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. I'm like, after the Iron Giant, Netflix, what the fuck, man?
To be fair, you were surprised.
I was. Yeah, I'll give you that. They surprised the fuck out of me. Go straight from the Iron Giant to child abuse. Jesus Christ. But yeah, we do need to move on because, we'll chat about this film for so long. We'll talk longer than the film's only 87 minutes. We've already caught up with it. Ridiculous.
Yeah, pretty much. Right, so my three loves then. I'm going to go with the design of the Iron Giant himself. Absolutely great. The general, I honestly said, I love the fact that the general is a sympathetic general. He's not that overbearing. He's not that guy who's just, I'm going to destroy the world for no reason. I'm just going to follow orders. It's literally, no, let's stop and think about this for a minute. Even to the point is, you've just launched a missile. where is the Iron Giant right now? Oh, look, there. The General's great. And the relationship between Hogarth and the Giant. That relationship is sweet as fuck. It is.
Dude, you should have been doing the quotes on the poster. Iron Giant, sweet as fuck. You could also be talking about keep sweet, pray and obey, funny enough. But there you go. In terms of loves, I mean, one of the things I love is the tone, the messaging, the fact that, you know, they provide this message, but without making it political or having it clumsily handled. You think, like, if a movie did this in 2022, it'd just be so heavy-handed in how they deliver the message. Like, the message here, you can take it as you want, apply it to life as you see fit, but we're not going to ram it down your throat. Absolutely adore that. The animation style, as we've mentioned numerous times, I think is going to age like a fine wine. And yes, it's hard to see past that central relationship. The whole film hinges on it. And it's the reason that you don't need to find out where the Iron Giant is from, because that's not what the story is. Like, you know, it could be an Iron Giant, it could be a monster from space. It doesn't fucking matter. This is a kid and his surrogate brother, father, whatever you want to call it, coming together, learning from each other and becoming better people as a result. So yeah, absolutely fantastic.
Hate is tough, dude.
Tricky.
I mean, it is tough. So I've got to go with, and it's done so well that you actually do hate him, is Kent Mansley.
Yeah, he is a love and hate situation.
Yeah, he has done so well that you're meant to hate him, and you do hate him.
Oh yeah.
So I suppose it's hate for a wrong reason, but I don't think we had enough of Dean, Harry Connick Jr.
Yeah, no, I get that.
I think we needed more of him on screen, or more of his, because I think that him and Jennifer Aniston's mum. Not him, you know what I mean?
Jennifer as the mum,
as the mum.
As Annie Hughes.
Yeah, there you go, thank you. It seemed a bit quick to force them together at the end.
Yeah, that is the one bit of the film where and I've got the same thing down under hates, is that felt a little bit undercooked and underplayed. Yeah. Like, you know, this film is 87 minutes. I'm never going to complain about an 87-minute, 90-minute movie. But while I don't feel like I needed the backstory of the Iron Giant, if you're going to have them together, I feel like, you know, you could have a few more scenes, maybe when, because I love Harry Connick Jr. in this as Dean McCoppin, bizarre name.
Yeah.
I love the fact that he's you know, he looks like he's going to be this kind of like 50s kind of rebel without a cause. Is probably a reason he's called Dean, for instance. But the fact that he's an artist instead, kind of thing. I just thought, like, those two together, you have those brief moments when they're, you know, on screen, so to speak, together, and there really is a warmth there, and I like them together. I just feel like there could have been a couple more scenes.
But they barely spoke until towards the end of the film. Like, even to the part where he releases a squirrel from his trousers, and there's no explanation. She didn't know him at the end. She's asking him, "Sir, do you want another coffee or anything?"
It's a great scene, though. That's a great way to establish that this guy's fucking cool. Like, you know, where he doesn't rat you out despite the fact there's a squirrel up his trouser. Like, it's fantastic.
I do love as well when he goes, "I apologize in advance for what's about to happen."
yeah. He probably doesn't get enough credit in this film. Harry Connick Jr. is really good in this film.
Yeah, he is.
But everyone's good in this film. So,
to be fair, mate, I haven't got a third. I cannot think of a third.
I will fill the void with the simple fact, it's not the film itself, the fact that this film didn't do the business it deserves. Like, that's what I hate about this film. The fact that it was, like we mentioned it already, it was released the wrong time, it didn't get the advertising it deserves. But equally, I love the fact that it's become this cult classic, this beloved movie over a number of decades, and even Warner Brothers themselves, they have pushed it since. I think, you know, when it came to like video release, DVD release, they suddenly thought, wait a minute, we've got something special in our hands here, and has become this beloved movie over a number of years. But yeah, it is a shame that it kind of bombed on its initial release, but I don't think it's done any damage in the long run, because, as I said, I think this film is held in such high regard. But yeah, as you said, you know, the other one, the obvious one is Kent Mansley, because he's so unpleasant, but I love how well he's written. You know, he's not a simple bad guy. Yes, he is a wrong'un by the end, but so much of it is, you know, again, tied up in American paranoia of the time, his own insecurities, his own fears. He's not just evil for the sake of being evil. Like, to his mind, he's doing the right thing. He just goes about it in the wrong way. And when it comes down to the big moment at the end, he just panics to the point where he really should have ended up killing himself, and shows his most cowardly side in those final moments. So yeah. I do hate him, but I also love him because I think he's fantastically well written.
No, absolutely.
So yeah, I think that's it for love and hate. Facts, it's an interesting one. I think we've covered a few of them. I mean, the fact that it was called the Iron Man, but yeah, Disney not playing ball on that. There was a few things Disney didn't play ball on. The scene when the Iron Giant's hand is watching TV is supposed to be classic Disney cartoons, but they didn't sign off on that, so they ended up with just random bits.
That Maple cereal advert, yeah.
Yeah. But I do love the fact that there's like a load of like really cool nods to the 50s. Like there's Mad magazine. They really make a point of showing action comics. The first appearance of Superman, it really does kind of push it up to the screen. The Spirit gets a nod. Yeah. I'm not sure if many people know The Spirit. They turned it into a terrible motion picture just a few years ago. Real piece of shit.
Jackson as the octopus. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a great little touch in the movie where they're looking out over Rockwell, Maine. And one of the stars you see in the distance is actually moving, and it's supposed to be Sputnik. And I was like, yeah, those are the kind of tiny little details I love for the era, which shines through in this film.
I'll cross that one off my first fact I was going to give.
I do apologize. The last one I'll mention is the fact, and we did mention at the top, the town Rockwell, Maine doesn't exist, sadly. It's based after the artist Norman Rockwell for obvious reasons that we've already mentioned. And it's such a shame because I'm actually going to Maine in a few months. And when I saw this, I was like, oh, dude, I am 100% going to Rockwell, Maine. And I think it's made, oh, no, it doesn't exist, you son of a bitch. So I'm hoping I'm legitimately going to look up what town most closely resembles Rockwell, Maine, actually in Maine. So I will report back in a few months.
You're going to end up in a Stephen King novel.
Oh, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm legitimately going to Bangor, Maine, just because it's the home of Stephen King. It's slightly out of the way. I'm 100% going. Bethan, as you can imagine, is over the fucking moon about this.
I can imagine Stephen King's narration of you. This man just appeared out of nowhere, blocking out the sun at 14'12", just...
Oh, dude, it's basically just like the gunslinger, just only a clumsy giant.
This is totally a subject change. I'm re-listening to them on Audible at the moment, the Dark Tower series. Like, I've read the books, I read them when they first came out, but whilst I go for my walks, I'm re-listening to them on Audible. My God, Stephen King is obsessed with breasts.
Yeah, he does like some titties. Yeah. Although I'm amazed that's the one thing you took away from these books. But I guess that's the magic of going back a second time.
When I'm hearing it, especially in Wolves of the Cala, like when he's talking about the brute ones, all the ones that have had their brains taken out.
Yeah.
Like there's a scene where he goes, "Oh, Eddie's looking at the sister Tian or whatever her name is, and her boobs or her tits or whatever he says are the size of his head." And, like you are obsessed.
Yeah, I mean, this really is the strangest of all the sides. Us talking about the Dark Tower saga and the tits. Yeah, in fairness, I'm as guilty as you are. That's for sure.
Right, should we go on to some of my facts?
Yeah, some of mine, you son of a bitch, is supposed to be my section, and I'm ruining your facts. I do apologize.
Excluding the yells and groans, the Iron Giant only says a total of 53 words. To be fair, I thought it was less.
Yeah, me too. Honestly, I was surprised to hear that it was 53. It feels like, if you told me he said like 11 words in this, I would have been like, yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. The US Army as seen in the film is accurately depicted in its mid-late 1950s form, including a choice of vehicles, weapons, and the appearance of a soldier, the latter impressively down to the cut and style of uniform. Mm-hmm. Hogarth's father was a fighter pilot. A photo of him is on his dresser, clearly visible during his standoff with Kent. We didn't really mention his father. Obviously, he's lost his father and he's looking for that father figure. But
again, they don't really do that in the film, do they? As you say, you see the picture, but again, this film allows you to fill in the gaps. It doesn't talk down to anyone. Like that's what allows it to be 87 minutes long, because they're just like, listen, you can see the story. So much of it is visual storytelling. We don't need to tell you as well. We're going to allow you to fill in the gaps, whether it be the ending, whether it be about his father, and we just go from there, and it just makes for a better film.
Peter Cullen, Sean Connery, Frank Welker, and James Earl Jones were all considered for the role of the Iron Giant.
They're all great choices. All great choices.
Scottish Iron Giant.
Although Peter Cullen, it feels a little bit on the nose, doesn't it? You can't just have Optimus Prime as the Iron Giant.
Or Frank Welker, he was Megatron.
Of course, Jesus Christ. Yeah, that wouldn't have worked. I mean, again, James Earl Jones would work, but you kind of go in Darth Vader then. I don't know. I think they made the right choice. Unbelievable. I would have, if you had said all those names beforehand and said, who do you want to play the role? I'm not sure many people would necessarily pick Vin Diesel, but I think they made the right choice.
I can't believe as well, we've talked about this film, like we said, for nearly an hour, and we didn't mention the Iron Giant's battle mode. The three tendrils emanating from the Iron Giant.
Oh, it's total War of the Worlds.
Inspired by War of the Worlds, yeah.
Yeah. As soon as I saw it, I was just like, it really is worldwide. And, you know, it all kind of leads to this idea that this is a true love letter to 50s Americana, 50s sci-fi. It's so on the nose War of the Worlds. It's not subtle, but it's beautifully done all the same.
And you said about that hint in the star being Sputnik. Mm-hmm. The film takes place in October 57, the same month and year that Sputnik was launched. So it's the
little details.
Yeah, it is a great little detail. I think I'm going to end it there. There's quite a few in these ones, but they're just little...
Yeah, we've covered a lot of them as we've gone through the film in many respects. In regards to the legacy, I mean, we've already mentioned the fact that, you know, it's one of the most beloved cult animated movies of all time. The fact that obviously it did bomb, so it didn't lead to a sequel, which is absolutely fine. It does feel like one of those films where you could have a live action version of this film, but again, I just don't feel like you need it. Like, you know, a lot of films, for instance, when people say about remaking, say, Japanese films, or like Old Boy, for instance, a Korean movie where Spike Lee did the remake, a lot of people are like, what's the point? The Spike Lee version's perfect. The original version's perfect, the Korean version. I'm like, I totally agree with you, but you don't realize how many people won't see that simply because it's in Korean. A lot of people just won't do it. So for me, a lover of the original Old Boy, a big fan of Korean cinema, but it's not made for me. It's still a great story. So even if I, you know, personally, I don't think the remakes need it, I can understand why. Whereas this, the animation style is held up so well, you just don't need to remake it. You don't need a live action movie. We don't need a 10-part Netflix series. We just want, just keep showing us the original 99 version, and let's just leave it at that. So hopefully its legacy is that it just exists on its own, I suppose.
It's the same with The Raid. The Raid is a fantastic film.
Oh, one of my favorite cinematic experiences of all time.
Absolutely fantastic. But because it's Indonesian, so it's being given a American Netflix remake, I believe, with Frank Grillo.
Which again, you know, I don't need that for the same reasons, but I understand why they're doing it, because it's a fantastic action movie. It's maybe the leanest action movie of all time. It's very much, it was released the same year as Dredd, for that 1 year when the plot of action movies was get up the stairs. That was it. It was like the bad guy's on the top floor, you're on the bottom floor, you need to get upstairs. That was it. That was the whole plot. And both of them are two of the best action movies of the last decades.
If you want to watch the American remake of The Raid, what's Dredd?
Yeah, just actually, if there's one thing you take from this podcast, is that if you haven't seen either of those, for the love of God, watch Dredd and watch The Raid. And when we say Dredd, we don't mean Judge Dredd. Don't watch that. No. That is horrendously bad. No, we're talking about Carl Urban as Dredd. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic film. Super lo-fi. You know, you can feel the limited budget, but in the best possible way. And both those films are just great examples of going upstairs. But yeah, The Raid in particular, I remember seeing that in the cinema and sitting there and being like, holy shit, this is one of the best action films I've ever seen.
So good. So from our Iron Giant episode of the podcast, what's Dredd or The Raid?
This always fucking happens. So like we talked about the fact that maybe it's more loved by, you know, kind of the contemporaries of Brad Bird and other animators than it is maybe the general public even. And you see that by the fact that the Iron Giant shows up in, you know, we already mentioned Ready Player One, but does show up across popular culture. And to lean into video game section here, because, you know, the score, I'll jump into it very quick. It's by Michael Kamen. It doesn't jump out at you like so much in this film. It's relatively subtle, but it captures the spirit of the movie perfectly. Sweet, nostalgic, bombastic when it needs to be. It does everything. It's not classic Kamen. You know, this is the guy who's shown up on our podcast a whole bunch of times. He did Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, Highlander, but this is just as effective in its own way. But in regards to the video games, and it's a perfect example of misusing a character. I'm glad that the Iron Giant is getting pushed to the forefront again, but Warner Brothers are releasing a multi-versus game. It's very much a Smash Brothers clone in many respects.
Was it the one with Scooby-Doo and Batman on the...
Scooby-Doo, Batman, Superman, Adventure Time characters, the full works. And one of the characters is the Iron Giant. And you're like, the whole point of the Iron Giant is that he doesn't want to fight. Like, that's his whole shtick. Yeah. And then you put him in a fighting game. I'm just like, like I said, I'm kind of conflicted, because if it gets kids to play the game and they see like, oh, who's the Iron Giant? Then they go on Netflix and they see this magical movie. I'm all for it. But tonally, it feels a little bit, you know, tone deaf, for lack of a better term. Because
the whole narrative of him was he didn't want to fight. Now you're putting him in a fighting.
No, he's not a gun. He doesn't want to be a fight, and yet you're going to control him, make him a fighter, make him a gun. it's a little bit ill-conceived, but, you know, as a means to an end, if it gets more people to watch this film, then I'm happy. But that is not the video game I want to see the Iron Giant in, put it that way. What I would like to see the Iron Giant in is basically, if you heard of a game called Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons by Starbreeze Studios? Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm going for here. Like, hardly any action. It's basically you're controlling both Hogarth and the Iron Giant, and large parts of it is stealth, but you've got, you know, you're going to have unique stealth mechanics, because on one side, you've got this very small kid who you're controlling with the left trigger, or the left thumbstick, and on the right thumbstick, you're controlling a giant. And obviously, the stealth for him is going to be incredibly different. You know, a perfect example in the film is when he pretends to be a poster holding a giant burger. So a lot of that kind of stuff, but, you know, much more narrative-based, much more kind of like light adventure with a hint of stealth, but very, very limited action. That's what I'd go for.
Yeah. So for me, there's an iOS game, a mobile game called Framed.
Never played it.
No.
Never even heard of it.
No. So it's basically just it's all done in shadows, and you're running around in shadows and you hide in the shadows, and then it's trying to get from point A to point B and working out puzzles how to get from point A to point B. For me, it would all be about Hogarth trying to rescue the Iron Giant.
Yeah.
I'd have him, like, I appreciate what you were going with. Yours sounds better.
No.
I would have him trying to rescue the Iron Giant, and then maybe the last level then is using the Iron Giant as something to solve the puzzle, like climbing the Iron Giant to turn him on or something like that. But I would have, because the way the narrative of this film is, you don't want to use the Iron Giant as a weapon. That's the whole point.
No. That's the main thing. I just think it'd be important to have them. Like, the whole point of this movie is the relationship between the two of them. So that's why I would want to have them on screen or in game at all times, basically together. You could have sections when they get separated or whatever, but for the most part, the emphasis is on that relationship between the Iron Giant and the kids. So yeah. Like I said, gentle adventure, but very much an emphasis on writing and characterization.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, in terms of the scoring and the recommendations, I think a lot of people can see where this is going, but this was your choice, so you can go first, sir. Yeah,
it's 2 stars. No, it's, to be fair, it is a 5-star animation film. I caveat with animation film, because this is definitely a 5-star film for me, animation style, and I would recommend this to others. It is just a very heartwarming story. It's done really well. I really like it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put in that caveat. I mean, you know, I would judge an animated movie in the same way I judge a live-action movie. I think it's a 5-star film, full stop. You know, I have no kind of qualms about giving it
better. Why don't you?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I try my best. No. I mean, I really do think this is a 5-star film. You know, like I said, I didn't see it for the first time until 10 years ago, and I knew it was something special then. I was a little disappointed in myself that I hadn't seen it earlier. But going back and rewatching it a second time, and it's always the sign of a truly great film, that it's even better second time around. And this movie was. And other than my slight issue with the fact that maybe you could have had more of Dean and
Annie.
Jennifer and Annie, sorry, thank you. I think you could have done a bit more with their relationship. That is a minor quibble with what is otherwise an almost perfect movie, and one that is aged absolutely beautifully. There's no part of you when you watch this and go, this is a movie that was made in 1999. Like, this could have been made yesterday. And that is, you know, we rarely have that when we look back and watch these films. I think we famously said, like, you know, 50%, especially in HD, of Willow. There's large swathes of Willow where you're like, man, this could have been made yesterday, until you get some of the CG stuff in the second half and go, oh, no, wait, this was made in the 80s. I'd make the argument that if the Iron Giant was released yesterday, it really could look exactly the same.
Yeah. And as you said as well, 87 minutes, it trims the fat. You've got there's nothing in this that extends, that drags out. No. It's done really well.
Every choice is so purposefully made, and you know just every decision is nailed. Other than that, like we said, minor quibble for the most part. I think they nailed the ending. I think they nailed the relationship. They nailed the characterization, the bad guy, even the military, the interpretation of the military, which I think is fantastic. And it's in no way lazy. As you said, you know, we mentioned it earlier, they could have so easily gone down that route of just the military are the bad guys rather than making a more personal story. But, as I said, you know, if anything's aged well, it's that animation style is absolutely gorgeous. So yes, unsurprisingly, I would recommend it. And that is, again, without a caveat. This isn't what, like I said, this isn't one of those one for them, one for us. You don't need to watch it with, oh, well, that bit's for the kids. This is just a brilliantly made movie from start to finish. And it doesn't matter if you're 5 or you're 20, in the same way as Indiana Jones, for instance. You're just like, this works for everyone as the perfect family movie.
Yeah, it is definitely a film that everyone can watch and enjoy. Yeah. So that was The Iron Giant. We are all on tenterhooks, Liam. What are we watching next?
What are we going to pick? What are we going to pick? Who knows? Well, if you have listened to this podcast, you'll know that we are going to watch First Blood Part 1, a very unique entry in the Rambo saga, I guess, at this point.
And I would go on record to say probably the best one.
Oh, 100%. I don't even think it's a question. I've got a soft spot for Rambo 3 in particular, in terms of just being 80s excess. Like, you know, if you go back and watch Rambo First Blood and Rambo Part 3 in the same day, for instance, and, you know, you find out they were made, 6 years apart? Like, they feel like they're from different centuries. There's like the journey that Rambo goes on is one of the most unique and bizarre in cinematic history. Where he ends up in Rambo 3 and where he eventually ends up in the truly terrible Rambo 5, Last Blood, which is an upsettingly, like, what is it about the fifth part of movies? Outside of Fast and Furious, where bizarrely the fifth one's the best. You know, like Rambo 5 very much is in that kind of Die Hard 5 category. Just one of the most disappointing movies I've ever seen. But we will cover this next week. So as always, thank you for listening to our Iron Giant podcast. And please do join us next week for a very different movie in Sylvester Stallone's First Blood Part 1. Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing.
Cheers, Darry.
Thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Hey, you guys!